First and foremost, as I mentioned, as Connor West mentioned, thoughts and prayers go out to the Floyd family. I can only imagine what they're going through and everyone associated with them. They're a family in mourning, a family that hasn't had a chance to grieve in any sort of meaningful way. They've had to replay their son, nephew, niece, sorry, not son, nephew, uncle, uh, you know, death on the interwebs with everyone else to watch at the same time. It's just shocking to even think how they can go through that and how they're remaining so strong. You can only just pray for them, really keep them in your prayers. But some thoughts about the whole issue that I wrote here. So I think number one, I think this is bound to happen. I think everything that has happened so far, especially since COVID, my eyes have been open to like the necessity for good leadership in any way of in most places. Leadership is really the answer. If you don't have strong leadership, if you don't have good leadership, it really is it really is a flip of a coin whether or not things going to be successful or not. And having read extreme ownership, you get to see what actual good leadership looks like, sounds like, and how it can be cultivated. So that's one of the things. Number what I wrote here. I think it's also a consequence of the lockdown. I think having spent the best part of 3 months plus, most of the Western nations have spent about 3 months in lockdown. I think for the most part, I imagine the United States and the UK have probably had it the worst in terms of the lack of direction, information, leadership, and governance from the people that we put into power. Right? They haven't really been able to articulate what exactly is going on. They've been probably quick to lock down, right? I think Trump is somebody has been banning around that line about how he was the first to stop the travel from China into the United States. Bravo, pat on the back for you. But mostly, they've been incredibly inept at what comes next. It's all well and good locking down the country. It's all well and good telling us to stay at home, to remain vigilant so we don't spread this invisible disease around. But then what happens next? What's the plan for the people that aren't necessarily lucky enough to work in companies that where they have a laptop that they can take home and work from home? What happens for people that work in the service industry? What happens to people that don't have healthcare? What happens to people that don't have childcare? So many unanswered questions that leadership weren't really in a place to address in any sort of meaningful way, which I think, in a weird part, did build up a lot of resentment. I think even some of the people, especially in America, I'd assume, especially people that went to go and protest at their local town halls, for the lockdowns to be eased or for lockdowns to be removed so that they can open their small businesses because of tourist seasons that's coming during the summer. I think a lot of those people, some of which were probably, I'd imagine, were ardent Trump fans, would probably look at the person that they voted in and be like, we voted you in so you could help us with situations like this. We thought you'd have our back and you didn't. It'll make them question where their loyalties lie. And I think in that, a lot of resentment's going to build up, right? A lot of people are going to be thinking, why am I being put in this situation that's been no fault of my own? Why am I not being allowed to choose what I do next? Why am I being forced into a position that only benefits a small segment of the population? And then every time you try and question the rationale behind being locked indoors, and maybe you look at the numbers, and you might have a colleague, you might have a family member or two that works in the health department, and they're giving you bits of information. But anytime you try and question anything, you get shot down. You get told to listen to the scientists, listen to the medical professionals, and your voice isn't heard. So what do you think that does to people? What do you think that's going to do to their mental psyche? What do you think that's going to make them? How do you think they're going to look at the world once they are allowed outside? And then off the back of all this nonsense, you see this video play out of this, genteel black dude for the most part, because they love to portray this image of the black man being this big scary ape of a man that's going to, as soon as they touch you, they're going to break you in two. But essentially you get this really genteel looking black dude obeying the police officer's orders, communicating with them, hand tied behind his back, handcuffed behind his back, right? With 3 or 4 police around him, and then the next moment you see a police officer essentially squeeze the life out of him with his knee on his neck, with 3 other police officers holding him down. And regardless of where you land on the political spectrum, you can't but help but think, what the fuck is going on? This is a complete piss take. And then of course you're then reminded by your whoever they lean on, the political party, whether or not it's a modern day lynching, or whether there's nothing to see here, he was just an arrest. But you just can't get that image out of your head, that somehow in the midst of the lockdown, where we're all going through this collective pain, this collective misery, we're missing our friends, we're missing our regular scheduled activities that we do, we're missing our everyday life. Somehow some a random citizen's life has got taken away from them because of what? Because they might have used a dodgy $20 note in a shop or something. It's just bizarre. And again, it's a consequence of lack of leadership stemming from COVID, maybe even prior if you want to go back further enough. But the lack of leadership as to how we get out from the other side has led people to the place that we're at now, with, they're frustrated, they're angry, they don't know how else to react. You give them a reason and then poof, here we are. Another point I'll put here as well is that it could also be a consequence of the tone deaf celebrities trying to appear relatable by having the opposite effect, and which emphasizes the haves and the have-nots. Now, it's probably a bit unfair to blame celebs for what's happened, but I think nothing happens as an isolated incident. I'm a big believer in that. I think there are all these little inconsequential events that usually add up to the big final show. And when you have people like Gal Gadot singing that stupid Imagine song, you have celebrities in their massive apartments, spacious mansions, telling you that we're all going through this together, telling you to stay the fuck indoors, scolding you when you go outside, giving you, showing you these inspirational cooking videos, and then making fucking sourdough bread and cocktails. It, for a certain segment of the population who's already a bit suspicious, right? Who maybe hasn't had the luck of the draw, who maybe has had some bad breaks here and there throughout life, you wouldn't be far-fetched to point at those people and say, hey, how come they are going through life in a completely different reality than I am, even though we're both in the same situation? Right? This COVID has basically shown that, hasn't it? We're essentially all locked in our homes, but it's affecting people differently depending on where you are economically, and the things that you've done in your life that basically led you to a position where are you able to survive off your savings? Have you been furloughed? Are you able to get some sort of benefits from the government, or are you just flat out luck? Again, it's a bit of a stretch, I know, but there is a part of me that thinks a lot of this anger and frustration that you see on the face of the protesters, the rioters, the looters, whatever you want to call them, people out there who are essentially keeping George Floyd's name alive, a lot of it has to come from that. It has to stem from being in front of your phone for 24 hours in a day, right? At home, nowhere else to go, no ability to see your friends, hug your family members. That's going to do something to your mental psyche. It has to. Another bit I read here, I said the stimulus check debacle, debating who gets it or not, arguing about Trump putting his signature on it, and some people still don't have it. That has to do something, right? From what I understand, the benefit system in the US is not as easy as it is in the UK. In the UK, to get benefits, it's pretty straightforward for the most part, right? You go job centre, you apply online, universal credit, I think, right? It's not as much as it was prior when it was called job seekers allowance, but for the most part, most people get what, you get it pretty easily. But in the States, it's a very arduous process to go through. Some places still have food stamps, for fuck's sake, right? So imagine that you've been given this promise, or you've been given this little light down the end of the tunnel, that they were going to provide you with a stimulus check that would be equivalent to $1,200 a month. I think that's the max, right? So you could get, it's a range, I guess, of anything from $400 to, I guess, $1,200. But the conversation, instead of it being around making sure you get as many checks out there as quickly as possible into the hands of Americans who can actually use them, right, to feed their families, and keep the lights on, instead it devalues into a conversation about whether or not Trump should have his signature on the check or not. It becomes a political debate, so much so that they spend more time trying to negate the bill. I think so. I remember, again, I'm not a big politics dude, but I do remember reading something along the lines of Nancy Pelosi fighting against allowing Trump to put his name on the check. Like, who gives a shit? Let the man put his name on the check if he wants to. If that strokes his ego, and if that gets him up at night or whatever, the most important thing is the person at the end of the funnel. the person that needs that check at the end of the month or the middle of the week to pay their bills and make sure their kids have food on the table. Yet they're arguing about a bloody name on a check. That is definitely going to add to some level of frustration, right? People haven't had a way of making an income through the sweat of their brow and through the hard work of their hands since what, February or something, and you expect people to just sit docile at home whilst they watch a fellow citizen of theirs life get squeezed out of their body through their camera phone. They're not going to do that. And then I think fast forward, right? Or well, not fast forward, maybe go back a little bit. Yeah, fast forward a little bit in terms of something that could have added to the situation, the Ahmaud Arbery incident, right? Regardless of what the details are, because I think, again, some of these things, I'm not too sure if it's a distraction or it's because, everything is heavily politicized. The lack of empathy that I see in the world is really frightening, isn't it? Because you see a video of a dude jogging, running, whatever he's doing in one frame. Then the next frame you see him being followed by two men in a car. One gets out or another one gets out, they accost him, there's an exchange, a verbal exchange, maybe some hand movements, and then the next minute he's being shot point blank and he dies. And instead of it being an issue of you just can't go around, being vigilantes and enacting street justice on people because you think they look a bit sketchy. It turns into that kind of conversation. Who wears Timberlands when they go jogging, looking at his prior arrest. Was he a good guy or not a good guy? The people that shot him were ex-cops. Was that mean the media exonerates them? That conversation was so insane. It beggars belief. And that you can't help but think this also added to the issue that we're having at the moment now. For sure, especially when you find out that the actual incident that we see on social media was what happened a few months prior. I remember reading something on those lines. They didn't when they happened at the time, and somehow whatever state they were in decided not to prosecute the two men who shot him, and until it got on social media, it gained a new life. They will put more pressure on them, and then they had to go out and arrest them begrudgingly. Like, how does this happen? Legitimately, how does that happen? And then you have people here arguing about whether or not people should be looting or not. Can you not see what people are seeing? Like, people like to go on about, movies maybe potentially influencing kids to enact violence, right? Violent movies are not good for children. Violent computer games aren't good for children, which, is inarguable. Something we can argue about another time. But you can't help but thinking these kids seeing, first degree murder on their smartphones, a few, every other month here and there, that's got to do something to your brain. And then when you get the indication that they were not going to prosecute or that they're looking for a loophole, you're just going to go nuts, especially when you haven't got your stimulus check, especially when you've been locked indoors for the best part of 3 months, especially when you've seen your family members, businesses have to close, people have to move in with their parents, people selling their prized possession in order to make sure they have electricity in their home. This is definitely going to do something to you. And I said here, it wasn't dealt with swiftly in the public yet, and that's the thing I think about the George Floyd situation. I think if you're Trump, right, and you're looking at the political landscape, and maybe if you're Trump, maybe to be completely fair to him, he might probably look at what's happening with the election, and he might look at his opponent Joe Biden and see that he might come to the conclusion that he's seen now, as some people are estimating that he might have lost his marbles, he's not all there. You probably are quite confident that you probably have a good chance of winning, right? Cool. But let's say you're not confident and you might think it's a toss of a coin. You never know. People might think, they might just want anything but Trump in the White House. Isn't there a part of you that might think, you know what, this is a perfect incident for me to just insert myself into, right? To deal with the George Floyd situation swiftly, prosecute all 4 policemen, maybe have some second degree charges to the guy that had his knee on his neck, and then the other 3 get, I don't know, whatever charge that is when you're assisting a murder or you're willfully being unaware of it. But if you would have dealt with it swiftly and just put a nice bow on the end of it, and in world record time, what do you think that would have done to his sentiment, to his what's that word called in politics? They call it appeal to the black community, or the blacks as he likes to call them. That could have been such a good way to get around this issue, couldn't it? To really sort it. But instead, we see him not saying things, or saying things vaguely, allowing the protest to rumble on, changing the narrative into an Antifa thing now. It's just a complete debate. It's just like craziness beyond belief. You just can't even figure out how to put it into words how crazily bad it's been dealt with on all aspects. It's just insane. And it's you go, and then the inability to charge the police too was something that I didn't get. I guess, you have to investigate the issue, but part of me thinks, again, this is my own interpretation, but I think a part of me thinks the second half of the protest, especially on the second day, mostly stemmed from that press conference they held in Minneapolis with the state attorney, right? I think his name was like, what is it, Mike Freeman. Do you remember that? And he said something like, yeah, I've got the actual video here. I think this is what really stoked the fires in this whole debacle. This was such an ill-timed press conference. I don't know why they let him speak. But essentially made a comment like, we haven't seen all the evidence yet. We can't just charge somebody off the back of a social media post or something like that. Let's see if I can get it up on here. Yep, there it is. This is from the Aaron Rupar guy. Definitely follow him on social. He posts loads of cool little clips from news channel TV from the news. He mostly posts all the clips from the press conferences they have. Some of it's slightly edited with a left-leaning tilt, but if you want to find out what's going on, definitely check him out. But this is a quote from him. It says, here's Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman claiming that there's other evidence beyond the video of George Floyd being killed by a Minneapolis cop that doesn't support criminal charges against the cop. He doesn't mention what this evidence is. So this is what I think set it off in a really negative way on the second day, because imagine this happened, imagine the first riots happened on a Friday. This was the Saturday the next day at 3 or 5 p.m. right? And he decides to do this. Whoever decided this was poor leadership in all way, shape, or form.
It's a violation of my ethics to talk and evaluate evidence before we announce our charging decision, and I will not do that. I will say this, that video is graphic and horrific and terrible, and no person should do that. But my job in the end is to prove that he violated a criminal statute, and there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge. We need to wade through all of that evidence and to come through with a meaningful determination, and we are doing that to the best of our ability.
See how the economy of words can just fuck up a complete statement. If you would have said that last bit before he said the first bit, that would have been okay. If you would have said, look, we understand the anger and frustration out there in the community, that video was abhorrent, this is not something that we would we would wish on our worst enemy, whatever, blah blah blah. We're going to exhaustively examine all the evidence that's available, and we're going to make a swift decision on the issue, but please be assured we are piling all our resources into it. We're going to make a decision shortly. But instead he says what he said there. Like, what an insane comment to make when people are bubbling over with frustration. They're angry, they're furious, right? They're on the streets rioting, they're pillaging stores, smashing up property, burning cars, and you decide it's a good time to let people know that, hey, there's other evidence available. We know there's other evidence available. Why don't you just lie and say that you're gonna make a statement? He could have lied and still thought the same thing, and it would have been okay. But I think that definitely stoked the fire. That definitely didn't help things, I think, in the situation. And again, and I guess with the looting, I don't know. I would say I kind of lean towards the anarchy side of things. Like, having read, I'm really into reading books about the drug trade, organized crime, some conspiracy stuff. And when you really sort of look into it and you analyze it, you think, and just world history, world events, you think to yourself, has any meaningful change really come off the back of peaceful protesting, right? The Namaste sort of style protesting. Has that really affected any kind of lasting change? I don't think so. I'd argue against it. When you go and overthrow a government, when you go and enact your will on a nation, when you go and try and spread the gospel, you don't do it with cookies and jam. You go and do it with swords, right? You burn villages down. You make them bend the knee by force. That's how you do it. So if that's where our entire human history was birthed from, I don't necessarily see how suddenly in 2020 we're going to be able to enact any kind of systemic change by protesting in peace and putting daffodils behind our ear. That doesn't work. It really doesn't. Unfortunately, we've given them enough chances to kind of police themselves, as Cornel West has kind of pointed out, to really reform the police force, but they seem unable to do so or unwilling to do so. I'm not sure what side it is. From what we've seen, even with the looting and the rioting, right? Let's say the looting and the rioting is bad. Let's say what those kids are doing, is a reflective of the wider conversation. Cool. But the force they've been met with by the police has been really shocking, especially when you think of the context of the situation. The whole reason why people are rioting, protesting, and looting is because a member of the police decided that it was their constitutional right to take the life out of a member of society because they essentially walked into a newsagent somewhere with a dodgy $20 bill. That's the kind of reaction they thought was positive. They thought that was an appropriate action to take on a citizen. That's why we're where we are now. So for the police to see that video, right, and to still try and beat people up on the streets is just insane. I just don't understand how they think that's a good idea. And there's a video here actually, and a video of somebody put together of all the basically abuse that police have been dishing out during the protest. A little montage I'll load here on the screen for you guys to see. So it's the highlights of the protest. It's not the abuse one, but just check it out anyway regardless. People kneeling with their fists held in the air. Groups of police approaching the line of protesters peacefully sitting down. Tear gas and batons. Absolutely nuts. Buildings on fire. Some hugs going around.
Heart is aching, smile, even though it's breaking. When there are clouds,
guy with a chainsaw walking around casually on the streets.
you'll get by if you smile through your fear and sorrow. Smile, and maybe tomorrow you'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just.
And this is the perfect video, right? There's a video here of a dude in an orange hoodie being arrested by the police essentially. One has him, especially he's got his face down on the floor, right, with one police officer trying to get his hands tied. And then you've got one dude, another one comes along and essentially does the same thing that happens with George Floyd, puts his knee on the guy's neck as they're trying to arrest him. Now this is after what we've seen, right, after this graphic video, but instead we've got a video of two police officers doing it. And if you've read anything online about people that do jiu-jitsu, people that do self-defense courses, when you're lying flat on your stomach like this, and someone puts pressure on your back, it immediately stops the air, passing through your diaphragm. You're immediately in a disadvantaged situation. The person that's in control, quote unquote, should be able to restrain you pretty easily in that position. It's quite hard for you to have the strength and the power and the wherewithal to get out of that position, regardless of whether or not it's another guy on top of your neck. You don't need that extra force to really get somebody subdued. It's not necessary. But because these guys don't know what they're doing, they're poorly trained, or they're just willfully ignorant, or they just don't care, he still puts his neck on it. He still puts his knee on his neck. And luckily, one of his colleagues sees what's going on and moves his knee away. As in like, hey, wake up. Don't you see what's going on? That's the thing I don't understand. You know what I mean? Like, they're not even on their P's and Q's after what's happened. They're just continuing as going on. So the issue I'm assuming they're having, or that we're having as a society, is that there's no shared narrative, I assume. There must be a segment of the police force who, in their heart of hearts, believe that what the police officer did to George Floyd, there was nothing wrong with it. they must exist, because the reaction that we're seeing from the police, the anger and the frustration and the force that they are dealing with the protesters, makes you think that they genuinely think that people have got it wrong, that we've somehow not seen all the footage, that there's more evidence out there, that we're misinterpreting it, that we've kind of taken away the context to the whole actual issue. But what more footage can we see? What's really going to change our mind? The only thing that will change my mind from looking at it from the outside in is if I saw an image or a video of, I don't know, George Floyd attempted to stab a police officer in the neck or something prior to him getting, his hands cuffed. But I'm pretty sure that didn't happen. I'm pretty sure they took this guy out from the shop where he was kind of reported upon by the police officer. And again, spare a thought to whoever snitched on him. Spare a thought to whoever reported the issue to the police that led to him dying. Spare a thought to that person, They were probably protecting their business. They thought maybe he might have a forged note. I don't know what this story was, but whoever called the police on him, spare a thought for them. Imagine how much of a guilty conscience they have at the moment.
Why? If you just
People just had enough, haven't they? They've had enough. Just had enough.